The big picture is this. We're actually still heading towards a very nasty depression. I call it the Greater Depression because it's going to be much worse and much longer lasting and much different than what occurred from 1929 to 1946. So that's the overall environment. At the moment, we're heading towards something that looks like World War III. And of course, this thing with Iran and Israel is front and center at the moment. And who knows how this is going to work out. I mean, I don't understand what the U.S. has to do with what goes on between the U.S. and Israel. Israel is not an ally of the U.S. It's a liability of the U.S. We should have nothing to do with what goes on between these two countries that have to sort their own problems out. As per usual, whenever the U.S. sticks its nose into any foreign country, it makes a bigger mess. And I can give you lots of examples of that.
The U.S. is racing toward a fiscal and geopolitical breaking point, and Doug Casey says we're on the edge of the Greater Depression. With $37 trillion in debt, a new Middle East flashpoint, and gold breaking records, this might be our last chance to prepare before everything changes.
So the situation is very fluid and is likely to end badly. The only good thing is people have forgotten about what's going on between the Ukraine and Russia at the moment. But that's not over by any means. I don't think the U.S. is going to put actual troops, boots on the ground in Iran because the country is basically unconquerable. You know, the U.S. invades little places like Panama and Grenada. But Iran is hunting big game. It's a mountainous country, so the U.S. can't invade it. The question is, what are the Israelis going to do? It's completely unpredictable. Look, when we're looking at politics, to start with, you have to recognize that the best and brightest people don't go into government. It's actually the poorest and worst people. It's the kind of people that are interested in controlling other people. They're professional busybodies. They're interested in power and lining their pockets as well. So these are the people that are making the decisions. They're very dangerous. They're sociopathic. Some of them are psychopaths. So I don't know what Iran should do. Iran is not a terrorist country except when it comes to Israel. There are religious reasons and other reasons why they're at odds with the Israelis, and the Israelis are at odds with them. But let them sort it out so it doesn't turn into World War III. But once the Americans get seriously involved, which it looks like they are, dropping these bombs on Iranian facilities, then the Chinese or the Russians or God knows who might also get involved, and the game is on. So the key is the U.S. should just stay away from it. Anybody who's in a financial position to do it, and I suspect many of your listeners are in that position, should have a second country, a second passport, a bolt hole, where if things go bad, they can take a vacation to. So many times in world history, things have changed rapidly and radically in countries. Russia in 1917, Germany 1933, Vietnam in 1975, China in 1948. Anything can happen. And when governments go crazy, residents of that particular country should get going and go someplace where they won't be harmed. It makes no sense for a human to act like a potted plant and stay in one place when you're about to get eaten. I pointed out in this article on internationalman.com that when the penny was first issued, it used to be the size of today's $50, and it was pure copper. And it's gradually been gotten smaller, and then it's been debased with zinc until in 1982, the U.S. penny was no longer even copper. In a genuine fraud, the government made the penny out of zinc and gave it a copper wash so that the average person doesn't even know that it's changed. And at this point, it costs the U.S. government, they say 3.7 cents. So let's accept that to mint every penny. So it makes no economic sense to mint pennies. In fact, the nickel, which is now the smallest U.S. currency, people don't even pick pennies up off the street. In fact, they don't even pick nickels up off the street. The nickel, it costs them 15 cents to make a 5-cent coin now. And this is because of the debasement of the currency. The U.S. government is running about a $2 trillion per year deficit. But nobody's buying that deficit. Buying government bonds is buying a hot potato. So what happens with the government deficits is they're sold to the U.S. Central Bank, the Federal Reserve. And the Reserve prints up money crediting the government's accounts at commercial banks, which it spends. It turns into super money. It's just like printing money on a printing press in the old days. So that's the most direct cause of the debasement of the currency. And in the years to come, we'll see the U.S. government spending $4-5 trillion of deficit that'll be monetized, and inflation is going to get worse. I mean, and Trump is not solving anything at all. He's a big spending statist. I had high hopes for Trump to start with when he talked about Doge and having Elon Musk root out all the fraud and waste in the U.S. government. But nothing's happened with that. Musk's group has pointed out immense examples of fraud and waste. Nothing's happened. In Trump's stupid, big, wonderful bill or whatever he calls it, nothing has changed to get rid of the fraud. So it's a real problem. Jerome Powell or anybody else shouldn't try to control interest rates. Interest rates are the price of money. It should be done by the market. What I'm saying is that the U.S. did not have a central bank before 1913. The central bank is simply an engine of inflation and the growth of the state. It was the creation of the Fed in 1913 that allowed the U.S. to finance World War I, along with the income tax, which went into effect the same year. The Federal Reserve is purely destructive. It should be abolished. Interest rates should be set strictly by the market. Going cashless, the average person who uses his cell phone for everything all the time may think it's convenient and wonderful, but the abolition of paper money, and of course, paper money is just fiat currency. I mean, it's not redeemable in anything by its issuer. It's not like I'm in favor of paper money, but at least with $100 bills, you have anonymity, you have privacy, and you can transport that money privately and own it privately. But if we go cashless, it means that the government will know absolutely everything about what you're buying, what you're selling, what you own. It's going to be a disaster for personal freedom. And if you become considered to be politically unreliable or undesirable, they can debit your account without your approval or knowledge or a lawsuit.
Doug Casey warns that we're not just heading for a slowdown. We're heading straight into a Greater Depression, worse than the 1930s and far more global in scale. Today's $2 trillion annual deficit is no longer being funded by investors. Treasury auctions are under pressure, and foreign buyers like China and Japan have been quietly selling U.S. debt. That forces the Federal Reserve to step in, effectively printing supermoney, which accelerates inflation. CPI is still holding around 3.2%, but food, energy, and rent are climbing faster, a sign the dollar is quietly losing purchasing power. At the same time, the geopolitical map is on fire. The focus has shifted from Ukraine to the Middle East, where Israel-Iran tensions have escalated with fresh airstrikes and U.S. bombings on Iranian facilities. Doug says Iran is unconquerable. Its mountainous terrain makes a ground war unwinnable, yet Washington's involvement risks sparking a much larger conflict that could pull in Russia or China. He warns that politicians steering this crisis are often driven by power, not competence, which makes the situation even more dangerous. That's why he urges everyone with the means to have a Plan B, a second passport, offshore assets, or at least a safe haven to escape to if governments go too far. History is full of moments when staying put was the most dangerous decision. Russia in 1917, Germany in 1933, China in 1948. Casey says the currency system itself is part of the problem. U.S. pennies and nickels now cost more to mint than they're worth, a visible sign of currency debasement. He blames the Federal Reserve, which he calls an engine of inflation, and argues interest rates should be set by the free market. And he's deeply worried about the push toward a cashless society. Going fully digital may sound convenient, but it would give governments the power to monitor, or even shut off, your money with one click. This, he warns, is a step toward an Orwellian future. His conclusion is clear. Gold and silver are not just investments. They are survival tools. With gold holding near record highs around $2,600 and central banks buying at the fastest pace in 50 years, Doug believes we are heading toward a world where gold could be relinked to the dollar, but only after its price rockets to $30,000 or even $40,000 per ounce.
So it's a step towards George Orwell's 1984, or for that matter, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Cashless is a very bad idea. If we had a free market system and people wanted to use electronic currency without it being centralized by the government, that's a different thing. But that's not what's happening. It's another disturbing trend. In addition to debasing what the coinage was made out of, abolishing gold, which used to be in day-to-day use in 1933. And then in 1965, all the silver in small coins went out. There are now copper nickel slugs that kind of look like silver but aren't silver. That was in 66, and now copper's gone. In addition to that negative trend, what was printed on the coins, and it used to be in the United States that only concepts, ideal things, icons like liberty or an Indian or a buffalo or an eagle were stamped on the coins. And that changed starting in 1909 when Abraham Lincoln was stamped on the penny. And now we don't have any ideal images. We have dead politicians. And it's very inappropriate to have dead politicians on your coinage. But even when they replaced the eagle and the symbol of liberty and all this with dead politicians, at least they were semi-mythical figures from our early history, like Washington and Jefferson and even Lincoln, although I'm not a fan of Lincoln. Things started devolving even further when Franklin Roosevelt replaced the symbol of Mercury on the dimes in 1946. And then Kennedy was put on the $50 the year after he was assassinated. It was 1964. And this is a very bad trend. The next step was going to put living politicians on the coins. It's the same degeneration that happened with the Roman Empire. During the days of the Roman Republic, they had symbols, icons on their coins. But after Caesar, they put the current emperor on the coins. The money was being used as a source of propaganda, really. In a free society, the government, exemplified by the original U.S. Constitution, which has been modified out of existence, did nothing but defend citizens from force and fraud. That meant an army to defend the country from force from abroad, a police system to defend you from criminals within the country, and a judiciary system to adjudicate disputes without resorting to force. That's all gone. Today, the government does everything but those things. Well, it still does those things, but it does those things very poorly. So anything that they say regarding the money is almost necessarily a lie. We should have honest money in every country in the world. And that basically means gold, or if you wish, silver, should be used as money. It shouldn't be political money. It shouldn't be fiat money created out of nothing. Bitcoin may be a viable money also. I mean, I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2017, and having money under the control of a central bank and used by the government and is destructive. Look, in third world countries, this is why the average guy can't get ahead. Because if the average guy works hard, produces more than he consumes, and tries to save the difference to get ahead, what's he do? He saves his national currency, whatever that currency is. But if the currency is being destroyed by the government, he can't get ahead. So once again, central banks and frankly, governments are the enemy of the average guy. They're not our friend. I believe that gold is going to be reinstituted as money in day-to-day traffic in the future, and certainly in transfers between governments, because governments don't trust each other's funny money. This is why the Russians and the Chinese, when they trade with each other, use the currency of their adversary, the US dollar, because it's accepted. But everybody wants to get rid of the US dollar because it's being inflated out of existence. So since governments can't and shouldn't trust each other, they're going to go back to using gold because you need money. Otherwise, you're in a barter economy. And this is going to happen on an individual basis, too. We're going to be using gold and silver again in the future. But that's likely only after the current system of fiat money is destroyed. So I recommend that everyone, if they're going to do any serious savings, do it by owning gold and silver, bullion and coins. That's where the future lies. And in order for them to be reinstituted as money and replace all these ridiculous currencies around the world, kwaches and pulas and ringgits and all these goofy currencies that are worth nothing outside of the countries that issue them, I think that the price of gold has to go a lot higher. Gold is reasonably priced now relative to everything else in society. It used to be a real bargain over the last 50 years. That's no longer the case. But I think it could go a lot higher. In order to be, once again, back the dollar, to make the dollar exchangeable for a fixed amount of gold, as it should be, you're probably looking at $30,000 or $40,000 an ounce.
If Doug Casey is right, the window to prepare is closing fast. Will gold and silver replace fiat money after the dollar's reset, or will digital currencies take over first? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay ahead of these historic shifts.